It has been nearly a year since the man known as Europe's last dictator, Belarus President Alexander Lukashenko, was declared the victor in an election widely denounced as a fraud. The woman leading the opposition to him is in Washington this week, meeting with top officials. In a moment, we'll have part of an interview that Amna Nawaz did this morning with Svetlana Tikhanovskaya. But first, here's Amna with some background.
In August of last year, anti-government protests erupted across Belarus following what many Belarusians and the international community call a stolen election. President Alexander Lukashenko's government quickly cracked down on protesters, journalists, and anyone else who spoke out against his regime. That included Belarusian opposition leader and presidential candidate Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, who was forced to flee to Lithuania shortly after the election.
I thought this whole campaign toughened me a lot and gave me so much strength that I can endure anything.
Tikhanovskaya, who had previously been a teacher, then a full-time parent with no political experience, picked up the mantle left behind by her husband, an opposition blogger. He was arrested in May of last year, a few months before the election, and remains in prison to this day. Widespread protests slowed last winter, but Lukashenko's crackdown remains in full effect. Nearly 2 months ago, the Belarusian government forced the landing of a commercial plane in the capital of Minsk to arrest 26-year-old Belarusian activist Roman Protasevich. Protasevich, who had openly criticized the government, was filmed shortly after his arrest, recanting his comments.
Hello, my name is Roman Protasevich. Police officers treat me properly and according to the law. Also, I now continue to cooperate with the investigation and give a confession on the fact of organizing mass protests in Minsk.
It's widely believed he made the remarks under duress. Reports of torture of political prisoners by Belarusian authorities are widespread. Last week in St. Petersburg, Lukashenko criticized his opposition while meeting with a key ally, Russian President Vladimir Putin.
They turned to individual terror against those people who spoke frankly and who stood for the state. They try to push and to threaten. I think it's a question of time, and we will identify them all. We'll find them all, and we'll take them to justice.
At least 32 Belarusian journalists remain in custody, according to the Belarusian Journalists Association. Over the weekend, Tikhanovskaya arrived in Washington, where she was greeted by supporters as she deplaned. She later addressed a crowd not far from the U.S. Capitol.
It is a great achievement to be here and to receive support from the United States. But I ask you to remember that our path towards freedom is long and challenging.
Tikhanovskaya has met with several top officials, including Secretary of State Antony Blinken and National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, all in an attempt to ramp up pressure against Lukashenko's regime. This morning, I sat down with Tikhanovskaya at the Atlantic Council, a Washington think tank. I began by asking her if she ever thought a year ago she'd be where she is today.
Oh, of course not. I've never been involved in politics the same as the majority of Belarusians. We never... almost never believed that something could be done. But last year, step by step, many actions preceded this awakening of Belarusian people. New faces started to appear in Belarus, like my husband, Sergei Tikhanovsky. He started to go around the country asking ordinary people, how do you live? What would you like to change? And then COVID came and people understood that they can deal without this government. We, at the time when our doctors, medics waited help from government, it didn't help to them, and people united to supply our doctors with facial mask, with specialist equipment for breathing, and people understood that this is solidarity. This is we can't survive without this dictator, and people saw alternative. I brought my documents to Election Commission only, to support my husband. And I was sure that the Election Commission would deny to accept my documents because they understood that I'm wife of Sergei. But, they wanted to make laugh at me, and just look who will vote for a woman, for housewife, but they lost this connection with people in Belarus. They lost understanding that people woke up that they don't want to live under dictatorship anymore.
Where is the movement today on the ground? Because we all remember last year, hundreds of thousands of people taking to the streets, the brutal state crackdown in response. It's fair to say the protests have become much more muted since then. So is the enthusiasm gone? Has Lukashenko won?
Picture disappeared, not protest. Because when with the help of violence and guns, regime succeeded to suppress people on the streets, of course, people went to fight on underground level. People are continuing to fight, though we can't go out so massively as it happened after fraudulent elections. So we're trying to do very small step, but it's already a step. But we are 9 millions, and this is already will be 9 millions of steps. It's don't think that if you don't see those huge demonstrations, people lost intention for changes. Of course not. Processes are going on. They are not evident.
Yesterday, you met with U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken. You came out of that meeting and you said that you understand there will be, quote unquote, strong actions taken very soon. So did you request additional sanctions?
Of course, we are talking about sanctions because we understand that only sanctions now and fight inside country and sanctions outside the country could influence on the behavior of this regime and make them to stop repressions, release political prisoners, and start dialogue with civil society. And we talked about sectoral sanctions because they are most powerful. They would hit on the enterprises that belong to Lukashenko's cronies.
I have to ask you about the strength of his regime right now, because it's fair to say he still has the support of the security services, right? The military and the intelligence. It was just a few months ago, he forced down a commercial plane to take off a blogger that he didn't like and detain him. And he's now cracked down brutally on independent media and journalists, as you mentioned earlier. Doesn't all of that say to you that he actually still enjoys a lot of support on the ground?
He doesn't have a lot of support. He can influence the people through fear and blackmailing people. I think that the majority of people in the regime are hooked by him, and a lot of people in the regime, especially KGB, their hands are in blood already, and he's manipulated by these people. They feel like one system, but usual workers in this regime, in nomenclatura, in ministries, they want changes. You know how many times people told us when they were jailed by policemen and they fill these papers and the policemen say, "I'm supporting you, I'm with you, but I have to do my job." And people of the regime, people who are inside the regime, sometimes they are even more slaves of this regime than usual people are. And they are more scared.
Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you for the invitation.